I'm not going to ask for a show of hands for any who may have felt like Mr. Bean during a worship service, nor am I going to point out any of you whom I've seen behave like Mr. Bean in a worship service, but I thought that was kind of funny. This morning we're going to hear from the 42nd Psalm, and the context is this. The psalmist is going through a really difficult time, and he remembers what it was like to worship in God's temple in Jerusalem. He says this, "As a deer longs for flowing streams, so my soul longs for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and behold the face of God? My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me continually, 'Where is your God?' These things I remember as I pour out my soul. How I went with the throng and led them in procession to the house of God with glad shouts and songs of thanksgiving, a multitude keeping festival. Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my help and my God." Would you join me in prayer, please? May the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength, our Redeemer. Amen. 10 or so years ago, Jennifer and I had the opportunity to visit New York City for an extended weekend. After a day full of sightseeing, I wanted to attend Saturday night Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral, mainly because I wanted to say that I'd been to Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral. In case you don't know, I'm kind of a churchaholic. I love visiting churches and I love learning about different ways of worship. Some would call St. Patrick's the Cathedral Church of American Catholicism, and if you've ever been to St. Patrick's, you can't help but be awed by its size and its magnificence. We arrived probably half an hour or so before the Mass began, and of course the place was filled with tourists from all over the world. After we looked around a bit, Jennifer and I found our way to a pew in the middle of the nave. The crowd wasn't terribly large, and it was kind of a no-frills Mass. But as the service began, I couldn't help but be distracted by the many tourists who continued to stroll up and down the outside aisles, snapping pictures of the various statues and altars and monuments that are scattered throughout the cathedral. And not only that, they were taking pictures of us. They were taking photographs of the worship service that was underway. It felt kind of weird, like we were in a sort of fishbowl, like we were on display as these tourists, many of them from other countries and a lot of them probably not Christians, took photographs and stood behind the velvet ropes, curiously observing us as we worshiped, almost as if we were some strange or exotic creatures they'd never seen before. Now, can you imagine a velvet rope placed at the back of the sanctuary this morning with foreign tourists coming in and snapping pictures, gawking at us as we pray and sing and share communion? Or can you imagine tourists sitting in the balconies looking down and observing what we do? In fact, that very thing is happening in New York City as tour groups visit African American churches and sit in the balconies and enjoy the music and watch what's going on. Honestly, my friends, what we do here each and every Sunday is a little bit out of the ordinary. We get up early on Sunday morning when most of our neighbors are relaxing on the patio or enjoying a day off. Some of us still put on our best clothes. It is the one day of the week that I wear a suit and tie unless somebody dies, and then I can put on a suit and tie during the week. We join other people in this historic building. We sing songs. You know, there aren't very many places where people gather and sing together. We offer prayers and claim that we are speaking to the God who made the universe. We listen to some man, or at least in our case, a man, often wearing an academic gown who pontificates on an ancient and complex book written and compiled over many centuries, and he usually throws in a couple of lame jokes. And as we do today, we share the bread and the cup to remember the sacrificial example of a curious and controversial human being who lived 2,000 years ago. Truthfully, in an increasingly secularized world, what we do in worship is really kind of strange, if not outright bizarre. Why do we do this? Why do you do this? Maybe it's habit. I've always gone to church. Maybe it's a sense of duty. That's what good Christian people are supposed to do. Or it's something I do because my spouse wants me to go. Or I go because I want my kids to turn out well. You got to send your kids to church. Maybe it's tradition. My parents went to church and my grandparents went to church. We just go to church. Or if we're honest, maybe it's even mindless. Maybe you really don't know why you come to worship each Sunday. You just do. Why do we do this? Why do you do this? Why worship? Well, the word itself ought to remind us of the purpose of worship. Worship quite literally means worth-ship. Worship is all about worthiness, but not our own worthiness or our own goodness. It's about God's worthiness. Through worship, we gather to say that God is worthy. God is worthy of our time. God is worthy of our love and our loyalty. God is worthy of our devotion and commitment. Bottom line, worship is an expression of what we value the most. Do you hear that? By our mere presence here, we are saying that God is worth something in our lives. I dare say that when we worship, we're saying to the world that God is important enough to us that we'll get out of bed on Sunday morning and we'll gather with others in order to join in the praise of that God. Worship really is an expression of what we value the most. Now, given that purpose, our worship really can't be self-serving. True worship is not self-centered. Worship is always aimed and directed toward God. In fact, before anything else, worship is something that we do for God. Worship is something we do for God. My wife has this annoying and deep-seated need to hear me say, I love you each and every day, if not multiple times throughout the day. And as I've explained to her, I already told her once that I love her, and if I ever change my mind, I'll let her know. I'm a wonderful husband to live with. When we gather for worship, we are saying to God, we love you. We are devoted to you. We want to sing praise to you and celebrate all your goodness and your mercy in our lives. And worship at its best is an encounter with the living God. In worship, we meet God both individually and collectively. But the truth is, in our American culture, worship has largely become a spectator sport. Too often we approach worship as if the preacher, the musicians, the choir are the actors, and the congregation is an audience watching us perform and being entertained. Someone has described this as sit and soak worship. You sit there and soak it in. Someone in this room, I'll not say who, Nancy Gibbs, has said it's sometimes sit, soak, and sour. You didn't know you were going to be a sermon illustration, did you? But the truth is, whenever we worship, we are the ones who are performing, and God is our audience. All of us, not just the preacher, not just the choir, not just the musicians, all of us together are joining in the praise of God. Our worship is an offering that we make to God. And Scripture reminds us that God delights, God dwells in the praise of His people. Much as my wife likes to hear, I love you, God delights in our praise. Do you come to worship expecting to meet God? Do you come with a sense of anticipation that God just might show up in some way in worship, that God might have something to say to you? Do you come to offer yourself to God? Are you putting your heart into worship, or do you just sit there and soak it in? If God really is observing us in worship, what does your performance look like? While worship should always be God-centered rather than self-centered, it does have the power to transform us. Herb Miller, in his book Connecting with God, tells of spotting a building in a small town in Texas, and across the building in large stone letters were the words, Energy Building. Miller says that when a church operates at optimum effectiveness, that sign could fit on its sanctuary. He says, worship is where we find much of the spiritual energy necessary to follow Christ in daily discipleship. Without effective worship, discipleship loses its voltage. If there is any single thing likely to energize both the vitality of a church and the spiritual lives of its people, that one thing is worship. And Miller maintains that for the church, worship is job one. Worship is at the center of who we are and all that we do. Worship grounds us in our faith. Worship reminds us of our true and fundamental identity as children of God. Worship motivates us as we continue the ongoing work of Jesus Christ in this broken world. And worship connects us with that God in a way that gives us energy and purpose and direction to move forward in life and to move forward in mission as God's own people right here and right now. Why do you worship? As a side note, this week I came across a study from Vanderbilt University just released this past May that demonstrated this. Attending church or other houses of worship can make you healthier. It's a scientific research study looking at middle-aged adults. I'm sorry if you're in your 40s, you're now middle-aged, who attend church or other houses of worship, and it found that those who share and worship regularly reduced their risk for mortality by 55%. Marino Bruce, the Vanderbilt professor that was a part of this project, said, "Our findings support the overall hypothesis that increased religiosity, as determined by attendance at worship services, is associated with less stress and enhanced longevity." Dr. Bruce also happens to be a Baptist. He makes this observation. He says, "We found that being in a place where you can flex those spiritual muscles is actually beneficial for your health." My brothers and sisters, are you flexing your spiritual muscles this morning? Are you just sitting there and soaking in the worship service, or are you putting yourself into it with the expectation that God is here? Honestly, if I wasn't preaching here this morning, I would be in worship somewhere. Worship helps me keep balance and perspective in my life. Worship grounds me and renews me and even transforms me in ways that no other experience can. Worship keeps me connected in a unique way to this God who shows up when we gather to offer our heartfelt praise. And honestly, a lot of times I come to worship feeling just like the psalmist, who is at his wit's end and is deeply longing for God's presence. He deeply longs to gather with God's people in the temple. And he says, "As a deer longs for flowing streams of water, so my soul longs for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God." The Contemporary English Bible puts it this way: "My whole being craves you, God. My whole being thirsts for God, for the living God." My brothers and sisters, are you thirsting for God? Do you long to meet God? Are you craving God's presence in your life? I truly, honestly believe that worship is an experience like no other that can quench and satisfy our thirsty hearts. Worship is an opportunity in which we encounter God through word and sacrament, through preaching and teaching, through praying and praising and singing. And worship is where we might even see the face of God in the person sitting alongside of us in the pew, or I dare say, feel God's loving embrace in the handshake or the hug that's offered by a brother or sister. Why do you worship? You see, my friends, a fully committed disciple of Jesus makes worship a priority in his or her life. A fully committed follower of Jesus joins others in offering heartfelt praise to God and is sure to flex and exercise his or her spiritual muscles. A fully committed disciple worships regularly with the expectation that God will meet us and quench our thirst with his life-giving presence. In your bulletin, again, you'll find an insert that's titled Committed to Christ. I want you to pull that out and look at it. Like I said last Sunday, this is just a tool for you to use as you reflect on how God might be calling you to a deeper commitment to worship. Across the top it says, are you ready to grow in your worship attendance? And there are bullet points with several suggestions on them. You're just asked to focus on one and think about where you're at in your life and your faith and pray that maybe God's wanting to grow you further a step. It's very simple. I will attend worship 3 to 6 times a year. There may be some people who are new to faith, new to church, and to commit to 3 to 6 times may be a new commitment. But there are also folks who are very proud members of First United Methodist Church who are here maybe Christmas and Easter. Maybe we need to deepen our commitment to worship. Or maybe it's by attending worship at least once a month. Or maybe twice a month. Or maybe moving up to 3 times a month. Or 4 times a month. Or as my health permits. I'll never miss worship. Or what about this? Can any of us say worship will be a priority in my life? Growing to include the following. I will be passionate about worship as a true priority of my life. Bad weather, sports, or holidays will not keep me from attending worship. I will prepare the day before so that I can arrive at worship without last-minute rushing. I will warmly greet those who sit around me. I will surround my friends and family with worship. Through worship, I will seek to find strength, power, and direction to face the week. What is God calling you to do? Once more, this is just for your own personal, private reflection. You're not asked to turn it in. You're not asked to show it to anyone. But on October 29th, in addition to our financial commitment to the church, you can show on your pledge form that you're ready to deepen your commitment to worship. And that's all it'll ask. So one last time, why do you worship? Are you flexing your spiritual muscles today? Are you giving your heart, your life in worship to this God who already loves us so very much? Are you ready to commit yourself more fully as a faithful disciple of Jesus Christ? Let us pray. Our God, we worship you today quite simply because you are worthy of our praise. You are worthy of our love. You are worthy of our time and our devotion, and you are most certainly worthy of our gratitude because you love us and you forgive us in extravagant ways. Help us, Lord, to open our hearts and our eyes to see your presence all around us. Quench our thirsty spirits as we worship you this day and indeed every day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Remember our app, our website, findhopedowntown.org, through which you can give, stay connected, or watch sermon videos that you might have